You're troublesome and your role is over, so get out. Mom, that's exactly right. I was thinking the same. So, Allison, we are going to get a divorce. Please leave here immediately. During our married life, I was forced to live with my in-laws and even had to help with loan repayments, only to be suddenly deemed unnecessary and told about the divorce. I have even reached the limits of my patience. Sadly, I thought of putting everyone in my in-laws family, including my husband, into a difficult situation. My name is Allison and I am 34 years old. This year marks the 6th year of my marriage with my husband, Ethan. We don't have any children yet, and to be honest, our relationship has completely cooled off. I thought marrying you would bring a more exciting life, but it was surprising. Well, you can spend your life working here as a maid. Don't act too big. About half a year into our marriage, my husband started calling me you, and I can't even remember the last time he called me honey. I wonder why I married such a heartless man. Sometimes I reflect on the past, but the details of those memories have become blurred. However, my husband was much warmer, more compassionate, and trustworthy than he is now. Because I grew up in a PUA family, I strongly wish to avoid economic hardships when getting married. For this reason, I completely ruled out men who liked gambling as potential marriage partners. Even after entering society following high school, I carried the habits of my poor days. When buying something, I would overthink and be cautious. Ethan saw my cautious behavior as practical and economical, which might have been a big factor in his decision to marry me. How much savings do you have, Allison? You don't seem interested in luxury or fashion. Actually, I'm similar to you. Our personalities match, and our financial values seem to align, Ethan would often say to me. For me, who desperately wanted to avoid a poor life, having a husband with matching financial values was truly a blessing. It further deepened our bond. Married life is built on mutual understanding and support. We pride ourselves on understanding each other concerning money. The days spent with Ethan were fulfilling due to less financial worries. But on reflection, commenting on someone else's savings is a breach of etiquette, and casually stating a lack of interest in fashion is unacceptable. As a woman, being indifferent to fashion is unimaginable. My savings, well, I'm not sure about the exact amount, but I definitely try to save most of my monthly salary. Oh, and I am very interested in fashion. I always skillfully avoided financial questions to prevent further prying. We got engaged within a year of dating, but after we got married, Ethan's behavior gradually began to change. The unexpected suggestion of living with his parents came just after we got married. When Ethan returned from work, he started with excitement. I have something to discuss with you, Allison. Don't be shocked. His expression at that time gave me an ominous feeling. The topic he brought up was beyond my worst expectations. Ethan suggested that we start living with his parents during our newlywed period. It was a shocking proposition for me and had a significant impact on our relationship. This suggestion was far from what I had hoped for before marriage. I had dreamed of building our small world through our married life, but this proposal shattered that dream. For me, life with Ethan was supposed to be about just the two of us, without the intervention of others. Accepting this proposition was far from my ideal, marking a major crossroads in my relationship with Ethan. Ethan's unexpected suggestion became a significant trial for us as a couple and greatly influenced my values and expectations. It was a painful reminder that unexpected challenges can arise in married life. After discussing with my mom, I decided we should live with her. She gets lonely without me, and our apartment lease is ending soon, so I decided we should move, he announced. My opinion was completely ignored, and it seemed he and his mother had already made many decisions. Wait, isn't that too sudden? Your family home is quite far from my workplace. I really wanted to avoid living together, so I raised an objection, but I was firmly told that it had already been decided. He was always saying "Mom, Mom," which was off-putting enough, but what he said next was even more shocking. The house is too small and inconvenient for 4 people to live in, especially since my sister often visits. That's why I'm taking out a loan to renovate the house, Ethan said. This decision, too, was made without consulting me, and he had taken out a loan on his own. Can it be true? Is he serious? Before I could hear the whole story, I was speechless. How am I going to deal with this self-centered man from now on? That question crossed my mind. Life in my in-laws' home, and the frequent appearances of my sister-in-law. After a series of unbelievable stories, my husband made an even more shocking statement. That's why I want you to quit your current job. From now on, you must take care of my parents, not live just as my wife. If you still want to work, I'll allow you to do some work from home, he said. The development of the conversation was too sudden and one-sided, and it took time for me to accept and understand the situation. What? Why are you being so unreasonable? You're not considering my feelings at all. What? Why do I have to consider your feelings? I'm the head of the family, so I make all the decisions, he argued back. I had been working on plans for years, and now I'm being asked to give them up and become a full-time housewife. Gradually, I began to see the essence of what my husband was trying to say. I never imagined that I would end up in this situation within a year of marriage. Originally, I wanted to rebel against what I saw as a breach of promise, but I lacked the courage and didn't want to burden my parents. In the end, I had no choice but to comply. All right, I'll quit my job and live with you. But if there are any mother-in-law issues, please listen to me. That's all I ask. Yeah, don't worry. Listening is easy. After all, I'm on your side. I was serious, but it seemed that my husband was taking it lightly. And as expected, as soon as we started living together, conflicts between me and my mother-in-law began. The renovated house was larger than expected, and private space was secured, but I became busy with daily chores. I was still working right after the move. But my mother-in-law, interested in my work situation, said, "Hey, when are you going to quit your job and focus on housework? The house won't be in order if you keep this up." Every day, I faced one-sided criticism upon returning home exhausted. Initially, my husband had promised to support me with mother-in-law issues, but in reality, he never stood up for me, and eventually, he and his mother started blaming me together. You know, have you ever considered my mother's age? It's unreasonable to push housework onto her. I somehow ended up being the bad person just because I asked them to manage their own affairs. My father-in-law was present but barely noticeable, trying to escape the household troubles. "Excuse me, father. May I have a word?" Even when I tried to talk to him, he said, "No, don't talk to me. If she sees me talking to you, I don't know what my wife will say." It was just a simple question about the location of the circuit breaker. It's troubling that even such trivial conversation is not possible. 2 weeks after moving in, my husband and his mother started threatening me. "When are you quitting your job? If you don't, we'll contact your company." And a week after that talk, my resignation was decided. Despite resigning under pressure from my mother-in-law and husband, there were no words of gratitude from them. What followed were days of being made to work at home. "And since you quit your job and our income has decreased, don't just rely on me, but think of ways to earn money through home-based work," I was told. I realized I was being demanded to not be lazy and handle everything. I lost the energy to even argue in surprise. There was hardly any conversation between my husband and I had essentially become like a dedicated housemaid for his family. During this time, my husband's sister, Mary, often visited and confronted me, saying, "Hey, you're not leaving Ethan to pay off the house loan all by himself, are you? If you're living here, you should contribute to the repayments too." The renovation probably costed nearly $500,000. Why should I bear such responsibility? It felt unfair. Being held accountable just for living together seemed unreasonable to me. Forcing cohabitation from the start, pushing through a renovation, making me quit my job, and then demanding payments for the loan. This situation was abnormal from any angle. Normally, this wouldn't happen. I clearly felt that I married the wrong person. That night, my husband said with a smile, as my sister mentioned about the house loan repayment, "From now on, we're all going to share the burden. Actually, I think it's only natural for you, the wife, to pay." Seeing his attitude, I was just appalled. At that moment, I felt that continuing to live with my husband was impossible. I thought this situation would not only affect me negatively but also my in-laws' family. However, I hesitated to suggest divorce immediately. The main reason was to avoid worrying my parents. My mother was unwell, often needing hospital care, and my father was tired from caring for her. Bringing up my divorce issues might shock them greatly. Therefore, I couldn't make such a selfish choice. So, I decided to tackle the problems at hand first. I followed my husband's and in-law family's instructions, earning income through home-based work while actively contributing to the loan repayment. I frequently discussed with my husband about changing the loan process and accelerating the repayment plan, asking for his cooperation. Perhaps because I was devoted to repaying the loan, my husband said, "It's really good you've started acting like a proper wife of this house. If you were still arrogant, I would have considered divorce." Despite my contributing a large amount, the situation remained unfair. However, I decided to endure until things settled down. Before I knew it, I had turned 34 and it had been 6 years since my marriage. Thinking about the meaning of marriage made me sad, so I tried to stay as positive as possible. Sometimes, seeing old friends on social media posting happy family vacation photos with their children made me envious. I had wanted a happy married life and to have children too. But considering my situation then, those wishes seemed empty. However, recently, my mother-in-law had been less complaining about my behavior, saying, "The housemaid of the house finally became a decent person. She used to be an incomprehensible daughter-in-law, but it's good she's somewhat educated," while laughing with my sister-in-law. Home-based work turned out to be a good fit for me, and I had earned a considerable amount over the past few years, which I hadn't told my husband. Surprisingly, I managed to pay off the $500,000 loan in just a few years. Normally, it would take 35 years to pay off, so I was expecting to be thanked for repaying it before we turned 60. That night, I told my husband I had something important to discuss. Just about the house loan. Actually, it's already paid off. I have something serious to discuss with you today. In fact, I had prepared a divorce paper for this day and had been steadily preparing to leave the house. When I mentioned that the loan was paid off, my mother-in-law appeared, saying, "What? It's already paid off?" She barged into the conversation, listening keenly. "Yes, that's right. I was intending to have a serious talk with Ethan today, and at the moment I was about to talk about divorce, my mother-in-law approached me with a smile I had never seen before. There's nothing to worry about anymore. Unnecessary beings are no longer needed. From now on, we can start a new life with only the true family members, right?" She said. "Mom, that's right. I think the same. So Allison, we're getting a divorce. I want you to leave here quickly." My husband declared the divorce, even though I hadn't said anything yet. Despite being forced to live in the in-laws' house since marriage and even getting involved in repaying the household loan, I was suddenly kicked out from the house. I never imagined that my husband would bring up divorce before I could. Moreover, my mother-in-law called a locksmith right in front of me. "Can you change the locks as soon as possible? Please, as quickly as you can." I was just dumbfounded by this series of events. I had endured life in the in-laws' house and the relationship with my husband. But at that moment, I resolved to seek revenge against my husband and his family. My patience had finally reached its limit, and a flame of retribution ignited in my heart. Soon after, a locksmith arrived and began changing the house's locks. During this, my mother-in-law and husband looked at me smirking. "That settles it. Today you're leaving this house. From now on, it's just our happy family." Yes, Allison, you've done well to endure this far. But this is the end. Don't expect any compensation or division of property. We haven't caused any problems, continued my mother-in-law. Realizing there would be no division of property, I thought to myself, is this really okay? I never imagined it would come to this. While taking out the prepared divorce papers, then I created a document stating that there would be no compensation or division of property and had my husband sign it immediately. My husband signed the divorce papers with satisfaction, under the watchful eye of his mother. Meanwhile, my father-in-law quietly observed the scene from a corner of the room. The realization that my departure from them was becoming a reality gave me an immense sense of relief. I quickly packed my belongings and left the house with the signed documents. I heard cheers and applause from inside the house, but I felt like sending them the same sentiment, as the situation was about to change drastically. Upon leaving the house, I immediately rushed to the municipal office to submit the divorce papers. Then, I headed straight to the real estate agency. In fact, I had already visited the real estate agent several times and had started the procedures there. Mr. Cohen, my agent and an expert in this field, fully understood my plan and acted swiftly. About a week after leaving the house, I received the expected call from my ex-husband and his family. Allison, what are you doing? We received a notice to leave the house within a week. Is this your doing? Unbelievable. How could you? My ex-husband exclaimed in rage. Mr. Cohen was very efficient in completing the procedures quickly and finding a new owner for the house. Yes, about that. I was the one who contacted the real estate agent. After all, I paid off the loan for that house, and the title was transferred to me midway. You haven't forgotten, have you? I responded. It seemed my ex-husband had forgotten everything. He had only been focused on getting my help with the loan repayment from the start, and he had followed my instructions for the other procedures and changes, but he had overlooked the details. However, it was his own responsibility for not verifying. Trying to put that responsibility on me is unreasonable. In fact, I was the one who paid the enormous amount of $500,000. Plus, I never received any living expenses from you. Your parents, even when they received their pension, said, "We'll spend our own money," and didn't contribute a single penny to the household. The reason for that is, my ex-husband tried to make an excuse, but in the end, it was I who had been supporting this family for years. After I was told to earn income through home-based work, I did so thoroughly despite the constant dissatisfaction that made my stomach ache. Despite my continued support in repaying the loan, I received not a word of gratitude and was kicked out from the house that eventually had its locks changed. I couldn't just stay silent in this situation. Wait, listen to me. Let's talk again. I think we can understand each other. We are a family, right? Besides, I don't have anywhere to go after leaving this house. You understand that, right? My ex-husband appealed in a tearful voice, but I had no intention of being swayed by such feeble words at this point. Where to go? What about your sister's house? Why don't you all live with Mary? It's a family matter, after all, I suggested coldly. Then, my mother-in-law took the phone and furiously said, "How spiteful can you be? Living at Mary's is impossible. She's having a hard time with her divorce. I can't imagine burdening my daughter with this." I retaliated against her words. Is that so? It's fine to inconvenience a stranger even though she's your beloved son's wife. I see. I understand you're thinking well now. That's why I dislike you even more. There's no way I'll help. What are you saying? My mother-in-law shouted in rage. Her anger was palpable through the phone, with her furious voice making me want to cover my ears. I felt lighter having conveyed everything I wanted to say. Well, please leave the house immediately. You might have financial issues, but if you're a close-knit family, you'll manage by helping each other. Goodbye. I said calmly. Wait, this is no time for jokes. My mother-in-law screamed, but I calmly hung up the phone. At that crucial moment, my ex-husband just hid behind his mother and said nothing. His true character was revealed. He talked tough on the surface, but at critical moments, he backed down. I had chosen the wrong man. 3 days later, Mr. Cohen, my agent, informed me that my ex-family had stealthily moved out at night. Without a decided destination, they ultimately went to my father-in-law's rural hometown. Without savings and nowhere else to go, the countryside was their only option. Their economic hardships will continue, and they'll never again live in a beautiful single-family home. They should look back and remember the comfort of those times. I am relieved there was no division of property. After all, someone capable of repaying $500,000 in 5 years might have various plans, right? I was fortunate that my ex-husband was short-sighted. I plan to buy a new apartment with a fresh mindset and regain a comfortable life.
Didn't you hear me? You're fired, you worthless high school graduate. Pack your things and leave the company immediately. You're like a parasite, lingering around here. It's utterly disgusting. Those were the words my father, the president of the company, said to me after I had dedicated 20 years to the family business since graduating high school. At first, I couldn't believe my ears, but it was clear he was serious. He wanted to hand the company over to Preston, his adored grandson who had just earned an MBA from Harvard. From now on, Preston will be the trainee director. Don't you understand that having his high school graduate aunt around would be a hindrance? Something inside me snapped. I'll pack my things and resign today. Goodbye. Ignoring my coworkers' attempts to stop me, I stormed out of the company. Little did I know, a week later, my father would call me in tears, begging me to return. My name is Blanca Lewis. In high school, I loved sports and lived with my father, Frederick, who ran a tax office, my mother, Maria, who handled accounting, and my academically gifted sister, Holly. Since childhood, I excelled at sports, joining various clubs, while Holly was gifted academically. We admired each other's strengths, making our bond unique. However, my parents had no understanding of sports and favored my studious sister. Even when I competed in long-distance events at the state level, my parents never came to cheer me on. But that didn't discourage me. No matter how much my parents disliked me, I knew results wouldn't betray me. The more I ran, the more confident I became in my growth. Because of this, I received offers from several universities for long-distance sports scholarships, but my parents, unable to appreciate the value of sports, opposed my college admission. Without their consent, I gave up on college and decided to join my parents' tax office right after high school, determined to make the most of the confidence I had gained through long-distance running. Given the shortage of staff, my parents practically forced me to join, but I was determined to prove them wrong. However, the hurdle was high. My years as a sports-oriented student made it difficult at first to handle taxes, with their complex numbers and laws, but my persistence from long-distance running helped me scrape by. After graduating high school, I moved out of my parents' home and began living on my own. This was also at my parents' insistence, thinking that as a working adult I shouldn't rely on them forever. Sis, are you really leaving? Holly, the only one who seemed sad about my departure, saw me off at the door on the day I left. I'm sorry, Holly. Leaving you behind is my only regret, but I promise I'll keep in touch. And one day, come visit me. I'll be waiting. I gave Holly a reassuring smile, ruffling her hair to ease her worry. Unlike me, Holly was a bit shy and seemed like someone who needed protection. Leaving her alone in that house made me feel guilty. But since our parents were kind to her, I figured she'd manage. I thought if anything ever happens, I'll be there for her in an instant. Thinking I was acting a bit overprotective, I let go of Holly's head, said my final goodbyes, and left home. Several years after I left, Holly got married and Preston was born. Her husband was the son of my father's acquaintance, someone my father strongly recommended. As an aunt, I adored Preston and would often take him to the park on weekends. Preston became attached to me, and we shared a wonderful bond. However, as Preston grew older, my parents began to dote on him excessively. My father, in particular, had a strong desire to groom him as the successor. Preston was academically gifted and had always declared he would become a business leader. My parents placed high expectations on him, even interfering with Holly's parenting. Our weekend park outings gradually stopped as my father insisted that Preston focus on his studies. Over time, the distance between ASU grew. By the time Preston reached middle school, I was entirely sidelined. My parents were deeply invested in his tutoring and extracurriculars, hardly acknowledging my presence. Holly seemed apologetic, but I reassured her, saying, "It's fine. Preston's future is what matters." With my father's strong encouragement, Preston eventually secured admission to Harvard and entered the MBA program. High school graduates should just focus on work. That became my father's constant remark toward me. When he received the news of Preston's acceptance, I approached him with a handkerchief to dry his tears of joy, only to have it slapped away with those familiar words of disdain. The final blow came when my parents decided to attend Preston's enrollment ceremony, leaving me behind, uninvited. The antagonism was growing more intense. Holly apologized to me over the phone, but I assured her it was fine and that she shouldn't worry. I knew she was frustrated that she couldn't change our parents' behavior. I resolved not to trouble her further. I thought that if I could someday earn my tax accountant certification, my parents would finally acknowledge me. But contrary to my hopes, my parents' treatment of me grew colder. They began ignoring my greetings, and when I asked questions, they left them unanswered. "You don't even know that?" This is why high school graduates are useless. My mother often remarked, like a nagging mother-in-law. She sometimes even scolded me outright. Then, one day, a turning point arrived. I finally achieved my long-awaited tax accountant certification. After several years in the company, I decided to pursue the certification to build greater trust with our clients. To earn it, I had to pass 5 separate exams which could be taken over multiple years. Taking advantage of this system, I passed 1 subject per year, dedicating 5 years to achieve my certification and officially becoming a tax accountant. I first shared the news with Holly and Preston. Holly was thrilled, as if it were her own accomplishment. Preston sent a brief message, "Congratulations." With newfound motivation, I dove into my work wholeheartedly, and as a result, clients began to trust me more. Even outside business hours, I would promptly attend to clients' needs. "Thank you, Blanca. I'm so glad you're in charge," they would say, expressing gratitude with smiles that became my greatest joy. I never neglected prompt responses, and I enthusiastically accepted invitations to golf and barbecues, even on weekends. "You really work hard, don't you?" While enjoying a barbecue with our clients, my colleague, Elvin Wilson, looked at me and said this. It seemed he found it unusual that I actively participated in client interactions. I just did it because I enjoyed it. Elvin, on the other hand, wasn't particularly fond of gatherings like this. He was someone who would get attached to people he was close to, but when it came to professional relationships, he had a surprisingly detached side. Why did he even become a tax accountant? Still, that didn't change the fact that he was passionate. We got along well, and I knew he was someone I could rely on when it mattered. "What are you talking about? You're working hard too. You're here for the clients, after all. Come on, make the most of it and eat up. I've already had about 5 servings of meat. You're eating too much." Are you really a former long-distance runner? Apparently, eating all that meat didn't make me look like an ex-long-distance runner. How rude. I'd always had a big appetite, but I held back when I was an athlete, I joked. Elvin and I laughed over these light-hearted conversations, bringing our clients into the fun and enjoying the barbecue together that day. As I continued spending days like this, building connections with clients alongside Elvin, I gradually became invaluable to them, and before I knew it, I had reached the top of the company's sales. With many major clients under my belt and the growth in revenue from my accounts, my efforts had finally paid off. "You did it, Blanca. Your hard work really paid off. Thank you, Elvin. I guess I'll have to get serious and follow your example soon. Were you not serious until now? I couldn't help but tease him back, but I was genuinely touched by Elvin's congratulatory words. After that, I gained many more admirers apart from Elvin. I expanded my network both inside and outside the company, and each day felt more fulfilling and rewarding. However, my parents remained the same as ever. No matter how much I contributed to the company, their attitude was that it was only natural for me to give back, as they had allowed a mere high school graduate like me to join the company. At the company's celebrations, they handed out awards to top performers, but I was the only one excluded. Once again, I was filled with frustration at my inability to change my parents' hearts. Then, I received news that Preston had graduated from Harvard with excellent grades. He had completed his MBA and was about to return home. The thought of Preston returning home brought mixed feelings. He was once my sweet nephew, but now he has become the heir, carrying the full weight of my father's expectations. Still, as his aunt, I wanted to genuinely celebrate his return. My father was preparing to have Preston join the company immediately upon his return. Preston will lead this company into the next era, he said, moving forward with the succession plans as if I didn't exist. Holly called me, sounding apologetic. Sis. Dad is completely fixated on Preston. I tried to stop him, but don't worry about it. Preston probably doesn't even think about me. No, that's not true. Preston really cares about. Before Holly could finish, I hung up. Thinking about Preston brought back memories of our times at the park. Back then, I never imagined things would turn out like this. Before long, Preston returned and joined my father's tax office. For his first year, he was granted the privilege of no overtime, and my father personally mentored him. Meanwhile, I continued with my usual routine of overtime and working on weekends. Even so, I carried on with my work diligently, earning the trust of our clients. Blanca, we're truly grateful to have you here. I feel at ease when it's in your hands. The client's words of appreciation became my support. Then, something unusual happened. My father organized a welcome party for Preston, and surprisingly, I was invited. Looks like your folks are finally starting to recognize you, Elvin remarked. No way. In the reception-like venue, as I watched my parents talking to Preston, Elvin, who was sitting with me, leaned over and whispered that he thought maybe, just maybe, my parents were starting to recognize my efforts. I almost wanted to believe him, after all the hard work I'd put in. With that faint hope, I looked toward my parents, and unexpectedly, my father turned and met my gaze. After saying something to Preston, he started walking toward me. But little did I know that he was about to shatter every expectation I'd ever had. Blanca, as of today, you're fired from the company. What? I couldn't believe what I was hearing, especially at a celebration like this. I thought I must have misheard. But as I looked at my father's face, there was no trace of a joke. What did you say? Didn't you hear me? I said you're fired, you worthless high school graduate. Pack your things and leave the company immediately. You've been clinging to this place like a parasite. It's disgusting. I wished it were a misunderstanding, but it wasn't. He was serious. The fact that he was genuinely trying to fire me pierced through me, and the more I thought about all I had worked for, the more the anger surged within me. For the first time, I let that anger out and confronted my father. I've dedicated 20 years to this company, to you, ever since I graduated high school. Why, Dad? How could you treat Blanca this way? This is too much. Holly, who had also been invited, tried to intervene. Preston will be taking over as the trainee director. Don't you understand that having his high school graduate aunt here would be an obstacle? Hey, that's going too far. Elvin interjected, clearly furious as he addressed my father. In all the years we'd worked together, I had never seen Elvin so angry. Sir, no matter how much authority you have, There are things you should never say to your own child. And who do you think you are, speaking to me like this? I am the head of this tax office. What I say is absolute. Or, would you like to be fired along with her? Even toward Elvin, my father was unyielding. If my presence was going to get Elvin fired too, then Enough. Both of you. Something broke inside me, and I calmly stopped their conversation. Elvin seemed to object, but honestly, I wasn't absorbing any of it. I'll gather my things and leave today. Thank you for everything. Blanca, wait. Sis. Ignoring Holly's call, I cast a final glance at my father and ran out of the venue, almost fleeing. It hurt to realize that no matter how hard I worked, none of my efforts had ever reached my parents. But with Holly and Elvin by my side, I didn't want them to see me in such a pitiful state. Maybe it was time for me to stop clinging to my parents' company and strive to make it on my own elsewhere. Perhaps all I could do was support Preston, my nephew. Maybe it wasn't my time anymore. I'd have to make sure to properly apologize to Elvin later. As I ran down the dark road back to the company, thoughts like these swirled in my mind, and I felt tears beginning to flow naturally. There was no use crying, but I was determined to turn these tears into strength. With that resolve, I stopped running, took out my phone from my pocket, and made a call. The next day, I went around saying goodbye to our clients. Each one expressed regret over my departure, and many insisted they wanted to follow me to my new job. However, poaching clients would be improper. Though I tried to politely decline, I couldn't stop clients who wanted to switch tax offices of their own accord. They firmly insisted they wanted me as their advisor, refusing to compromise. I was overwhelmed with gratitude. It touched my heart deeply, and with most of my clients deciding to follow me to my new office, I couldn't hold back my tears in front of them. Yes, as soon as my resignation was confirmed the previous night, I called Simon Foster, the director of a tax office I knew, and after sharing the whole story, he offered me a position. It must have been tough for you. You'll be able to relax here. We'd be delighted to have you. Simon was incredibly friendly, and I remember pouring my heart out to him, even rambling about trivial things through my tears, but he simply nodded along, listening patiently. I recall how kind he was. If your father treats you that way, feel free to consider me as your father figure instead. Even over the phone, his words felt more fatherly than my actual father's, and I gradually felt a resolve to work hard for him. And so, shortly after leaving my former position, I joined Foster Tax Office, setting out toward a new goal. After working there for a few days, I was progressing better than I had expected. With most of my former clients following me and the director's full support, both my income and status at Foster Tax Office had improved. Feeling Simon's confidence in me only increased my motivation, and I found a renewed excitement in my work. About a week later, after finishing work, I checked my personal phone and was shocked to see a slew of missed calls from my father. I was stunned, as I'd never received a call from him before. Listening to one of the voicemails, I heard a message stating that his tax office was suffering a massive client loss, putting their finances in jeopardy. Preston's gone too, and the company is in danger. Do something. You still want to work at my company, don't you? Hearing my father's self-centered plea, I immediately ended the voicemail. Honestly, I no longer saw him as a father. What caught my attention, though, was the mention that Preston had left, which worried me. I quickly called Holly, who answered sounding completely exhausted. Apparently, Preston had submitted his resignation, wasn't returning home, and was staying at a hotel. He had grown frustrated with my father's authoritarian management style and was planning to transfer to a different tax office. According to Holly, my dismissal led Elvin and the other staff members to quit en masse. Elvin. I hadn't even reached out to him, yet he must have. Out of consideration for me. Ending my call with Holly, I stared blankly at the list of missed calls from my father on my phone screen. With both Preston and Elvin gone, and the departure of the other staff and clients, It felt like the fate of my father's company was in my hands, but I deleted the missed calls from my phone and gently closed it. A few months later, Holly informed me that my parents' tax office had gone bankrupt. Due to the client exodus and the mass resignation of staff, my parents' tax office could no longer sustain operations and ended up closing. They had just taken out a loan to renovate the office, leaving them with substantial debt. With my father's reputation tarnished, it's unlikely any tax office in the industry would consider hiring him. I heard from Holly that my father now spends his days working labor-intensive part-time jobs, while my mother struggles with part-time retail work, scraping by as they try to pay off their debts. Well, I would have liked to say I heard that from Holly, but surprisingly, it was someone else who filled me in on my parents' situation. It was Elvin. Elvin, your whole vibe has changed, hasn't it? You look like a CEO now, and your suit looks a lot more expensive than before. Hey, you noticed? Actually, I won the lottery. $10 million. $10 million? Shay, keep it down. You keep it down too. When Elvin suddenly reached out and appeared before me, I was completely taken aback as he casually mentioned winning the lottery. He started off proudly, but soon his tone softened as he continued. The truth is, I used those winnings to start my own firm, Wilson Tax Office. I'm the director now, and all the staff from your father's company asked if they could join me. I think I finally understand what it means to be admired, like you are. Elvin, living it up would have been nice, but I saw how hard you worked, so I couldn't just take the easy way out. So I became a director to take care of everyone properly and work alongside you, shoulder to shoulder. You're already a pretty respectable director. It's almost annoying that you're not acting like yourself. And working shoulder to shoulder? You're higher up than me now. Elvin, of all people. But I have to say, I don't dislike you. Falling for me, aren't you? I almost wrapped my arm around his shoulder to put him in a wrestling hold, but I decided against it. Instead, we put our arms around each other's shoulders and laughed together, looking forward to what life held for us. Afterward, I let Holly and Preston stay in my apartment while they recovered, keeping an eye on them as I continued working. As they regained their color and appetite over time, I invited them out for a meal at a restaurant one evening. There, the three of us finally had a long talk about everything. Preston shared that he'd grown increasingly disillusioned with my father's authoritarian management style and decided to resign after my dismissal. He couldn't endure the outdated practices that clashed with the management theories he had learned at Harvard. We had only been torn apart by our parents, but there was never any true animosity between us as a family. Although Holly and Preston had nothing to feel guilty about, talking about the past sometimes brought a shadow over their faces. But Holly apologized for all the hardship she felt she had caused me over the years. I tried to reassure her that none of it was her fault, but she was insistent. She was always so earnest, almost to a fault. Honestly, it terrifies me to think of what would have happened if you hadn't been there, sis. I don't think Preston or I would have regained our strength like we have. Well, I would have been devastated if you and Preston weren't doing well. But we're family, so maybe it's okay to let each other see our flaws a little more, don't you think? Sis. That said, I plan to drink a lot tonight, so take care of me if I get totally wasted. What? Wait, sis. I took a deep swig of the beer in front of me, exhaling with a loud phew. A bit dramatic, maybe, but I didn't want the two of them to hold back, especially after going through the trouble of bringing them to a restaurant. So, we shared drinks, laughing, and promised to move forward together as a close family of three. A few days later, I helped Holly and Preston join the foster tax office, where Simon welcomed them warmly. It feels like our strength has tripled. I'm counting on all of you. Let's not lose to our rival, Wilson Tax Office. Yes, sir. Since then, Elvin, along with his team, had been building his office's reputation, and before we knew it, Wilson Tax Office had become as well known as Foster's. Following Foster's competitive spirit, the three of us became even more motivated. As a united family, we pledge to work hard for the director and for our clients, determined to give our best every day.